Does anybody know what we've been talking about? A couple of y'all know, and it's written right in front of or over me. What have we been talking about, y'all? Joy. We've been talking about joy. Now, last week was, in my mind, it was fun, but talking about the reality of joy in the middle of suffering, that's not so fun. And we may not immediately welcome that into our life, but true joy, if we borrow the words again from C.S. Lewis, we won't know true joy until we've gone through true suffering. And I was dialoguing actually with, if I could, Nate. Nate came up to me after the second service, and he goes, "So, are you telling me, or help me spell this out a little bit more? Do we only experience joy, true joy, in the middle of suffering?" And it was a great question because I kind of left it that way. I kind of made it sound like we only experience joy when there's just crud slinging around us. And I wanted to clarify that that's not the only time that we get to encounter true joy. Today is the more proactive version of having joy in our world than last week. Last week was stuff done to us, and we need to hold on to the truth of who God is and walk in true joy. Today is more of the proactive conversation of walking in joy. Now, how many of y'all don't want an ounce of joy in your life? Okay, and that's nobody in here. So that means that 100% of us want joy in our life. We want peace in our life. We want the life and the reality of God in our life, period. So today we're going to, if it has kind of, I want to just land on it and just straight out call it manly, but I told Summer this morning, I was like, today's like a good man message. And she's like, why? I was like, well, it has to do with shouting. And Summer goes, so are you saying women can't shout? And I was like, well, that's not at all what I'm saying, because you and I have both done that in the course of our marriage together and relationship together. I do want to specify, I want to be very careful this morning, that when I talk about shouting, I'm talking about good shouting. You know there's a difference, right? There's shouting over things that you're disgruntled about, and then there's shouting for the good things. You see, that's what one of the frustrations about being a Browns fan is, because there's nothing good to shout about. Am I right? Am I I know I'm not overstepping anything because we're 0 and whatever. All right. But that's what's so fun about going to a Cavs game. That's why, even though the Indians didn't win the World Series, from what I heard, the field was electrifying because there was momentum and there was winning and there was a lot to be celebrating. And I know I've had a conversation with some of y'all that made it to some of the games leading up to the World Series, and there's just that excitement around yelling for something good. Y'all know what I'm talking about? That's why we love sporting events. That's why we like, I don't know, for me, I like good movies like Gladiator and Braveheart and The Patriot, movies like that where there's this momentum and this moment really where it looks like things are not going to work out, and then there is a battle cry, this yelling for something good or something good worth fighting for, and victory is accomplished. And it's very powerful, and it's very meaningful for us to look at these things. We need to be people. This is an invitation this week to shout. So you go ahead and Ariana, you just shout, okay? She looked over like, he just said my name. We need to, I want to encourage you this week to shout, all right? Shout in a good way. Some of y'all are looking at me like, did he have like cameras set up in our home this week? Because there was some shouting going on and it wasn't the good kind. It's an invitation to get loud. You know, there's a reason during worship when myself or the worship team will encourage us to get loud. Do you know there's intentionality behind that? We're going to look at some of this today. I didn't write down the doctor's name, but there's a doctor, a PhD, who did some research on shouting. There is physiological, psychological, and spiritual impact when we shout. I didn't realize this. I didn't realize there's physiological and psychological impact when I shout. I just know that in praise and worship, when I shout out his name, I feel better. I feel stronger. But there's even more specifics to it that I'm wondering how many more of us weren't fully informed of. I want y'all to turn to Psalm chapter 66. Ariana, you are doing so good, and you keep shouting all service long. If anybody's distracted by Ariana, you just come talk to me, okay? Because I want her to be loud. I want you to help me today, okay? She didn't respond. It's not on command ever. Psalm 66 is where we're going to turn. You might find it interesting that psalm, or not psalm, but in this psalm, we're going to read the first three words say, shout for joy. Shout for joy. Shout and joy in the Hebrew are the same word. It's the word. Now I know that y'all didn't come here and be like, I cannot wait to learn Hebrew. I just can't wait to come to church and learn how to speak Hebrew. It does mean something for us, though, when we understand the language that we're reading and the significance behind it. But the Hebrew word for shout and joy is pronounced ruah. And if you want to have some attitude or some gruffness behind it, you can be like, ruah. Not the word that from a few weeks ago that was like ruach, like you have something in your throat, but it's ruah. And just that positioning of your mouth helps you shout. Just, first service I didn't do a show of hands, but how many shouters do we have in here? Like you're fully, quickly able to acknowledge that you shout. Now, how many of you, please show your hands. How many of you are not shouters? You're not shouters. Okay. For those of you that just raised your hand, have any of you tried to shout and it came out awkward? Just because you don't know how to shout, because you're not naturally a shouter. I love being around people that are trying to learn how to shout. They're like, ah, no, ah, and it just sounds really obscure. Like, nice try. You need to practice that at home before you bring that out in public, okay? Because that sounds like a deer call or something. When I was on staff at a college down in Virginia, there's a group of students that did this 5-mile hike up a mountain, and me and one other guy, when we reached this cliff, and we're looking down like, 500-600 feet, and then it went even further. It was like a 500-foot cliff, and then you just saw earth in front of you. It was just amazing. And he and I had this boyish moment where we're like, hey, let's just yell. Let's just yell. For no reason, just yell. So he and I, we just started screaming. Not help. We didn't say help or anything because we didn't want to freak out other hikers. We just started yelling, and I think I just yelled, yes. Yes! It means nothing. I'm just yelling yes. But in that moment of just looking and standing in front of all of God's creation on top of this mountain and just shouting yes, and I might have been a woohoo in there somewhere along the way. I don't know. But it was just liberating to shout. And I wasn't angry. I wasn't confused. Nothing. I just shouted. I wonder why we do that when we accomplish something and then we get to the top and we're like, yeah! Those moments are significant. Why else in a movie does a film director give special attention to those scenes when they take different shots of different men yelling and getting built up and then going to do the task? There's importance with that. And I'm sorry if, I know a lot of people have different church upbringings. You might have gone to a church where you were encouraged to be solemn. That's not here. Now, I'm not also inviting chaos and whatever else might come with that. I'm not inviting that. But when we come to worship and when we come to be in the presence of God, you know He wants us to shout His name? Do you know He wants us to do that? Do you know that He wants us to lift His name up loudly? And so there is no solemnness. There are moments of it, but when we are praising His name, it's not, hey, go, just lift up your name. Because it just doesn't equate to the magnitude of who He is. Psalm 66, are y'all there? I could ramble on and on and on about this, but I think it's more important that we get into the Bible. Psalm chapter 66 is where we're going to go. And this is how it reads. I'm going to have you read or highlight some words along the way. But here we go. Shout for joy to God, all the earth. If you notice, the punctuation at the end of that sentence is an exclamation mark. So David is not being quiet about this. He's actually being quite enthusiastic about this. Shout for joy to God, all the earth. Sing the glory of his name. Make his praise glorious. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. Again, exclamation mark. So great is your power that your enemies cringe before you. All the earth bows down to you. They sing praise to you. They sing the praises of your name. Come and see what God has done, his awesome deeds for mankind. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Come, let us rejoice him. He rules forever by his power. His eyes watch the nations. Let not the rebellious rise up against him. I'm going to jump down to verse 10. I'm just going to read this real quick. For you, God, tested us. You refined us like silver. You brought us into prison and laid burdens on our backs. That kind of parallels what we were talking about last week about being brought into difficult times and still having joy in the difficult times because God wants to do something in you in the midst of difficult times. So it's his doing. But here, listen to this. You let people ride over our heads. We went through fire and water, but you brought us to a place of abundance. I will come to your temple with burnt offerings and fulfill my vows to you. Vows my lips promised and my mouth spoke when I was in trouble. I will sacrifice fat animals to you and an offering of rams, and I will offer bulls and goats. Aren't you thankful that we don't live in that day anymore where we have to bring our ram, bull, or goat just to worship God? And I brought Bessie, and she's been good, but it's time. All right, anyways. Come and hear, all you who fear God. Let me tell you what he's done for me. This is David talking now. I cried out to him with my mouth. His praise was on my tongue. If I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But God has surely listened and has heard my prayer. Praise be to God, who has not rejected my prayer or withheld his love from me. Just by making sure that we're reading the same book, what's the last exclamation point? What's the last period there? It's an exclamation point, right? Last punctuation. All throughout this psalm, it's exclamation. It's shouting. It's getting loud. It's raising a ruckus. So why is that? Why even does he say shout for joy? Why not just speak joy over your life? Have that nice soothing tone to your voice and just say joyful things. Like, I don't even know who I sound like right now, but like Mr. Rogers or something. Not Mr. Rogers. Is Mr. Rogers right? I don't know. He's shouting. He's saying shout for joy. Well, let's get technical now. Let's look into this. Let's look at the physiological. Let's look at the psychological repercussions and aftermath of shouting. Not like this guy. This guy portrays angry shouting. Some of y'all might be more acquainted with that kind of shouting than the other one. I don't have the other one because I don't know that it's ever been captured by picture. But sometimes when I praise, I look like that. Like, God, you're awesome! And it looks like I'm mad. But I'm not really mad. I'm just overcome by how awesome he is. Okay? You just act like you have like intestinal pain when you're shouting God's name. There's actually a spoof. If this is completely aside from the point. But look up how to worship. And some youth group back like 12 years ago did a tutorial on how to worship. And they're like, raise your hands and then act like you just had indigestion or something. You're like, and then like come over the top like that and then grimace. And so it goes to that degree of explaining how to worship. Anyways, in your free time, you can look that up. Shout for joy. It's not to be confused with angry yelling. Here's what happens when we shout. Like I said, I didn't get the smart guy's name, but he did some clinical research on positive shouting. Shouting changes your body's chemistry. It triggers your brain to release adrenaline and produces a higher heart rate, increasing blood flow, and it even gives a psychological boost. Why is that? I don't know. Like why did God create us that way? Think about it. There's no accident in everything that God does. There's no accident in the way that he has created us, in the way that we are wired. When we get frustrated, why do we yell rather than whisper? I don't know. I used to think it was just because I want to be heard. I want my voice to be heard, but there's something deeper in there. There's a trigger as to why our voice elevates and all of this stuff happens. He goes on to say this gives reason to why hearing loud music or your favorable music makes you feel energized and pumped. Do any of you listen to lullabies when you lift weights? Rock-a-bye, baby, in the treetop. It doesn't make sense. I don't get pumped by listening to classical music. It doesn't happen. I listen to stuff that I probably wouldn't play in church, not because the language is bad, but anyways, you know what I'm saying. There's certain types of music that I would listen to and I will turn up so that my body reacts to the volume, and there's the adrenaline and the rush and all of that. And then you, listen to this, then you're able to do something you wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Do you know that's the significance of coming here and worshiping God? When you lift up not only his name, but you lift up his name by lifting up your voice to him. When you do that, there's something that happens not just in your physical body, but in your spiritual body as well, that causes you and enables you to face the week that you wouldn't otherwise be able to face. And I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to go back to work. I don't know how my wife and I are going to make it through this season, or I don't know how this is going to happen. Let me tell you how it's going to happen. It's going to happen when you stop complaining and when you start shouting joy to God. You start shouting his name, making his name great, making his name above every other name, like speaking that name that is above every name. And it's not just the physical adrenaline that happens. The Bible talks about build yourself up in the most holy faith. That building up doesn't happen just by accident. Anything that happens, all things that happen, how do I want to word this? The spiritual happenings in our life are never accidental. So if you're frustrated that your relationship with Christ doesn't look like what you think it ought to look like, it's not going to happen accidentally. And on this particular subject, this whole point of shouting, you know, God doesn't care what you sound like. He just likes the sound of your heart. God is completely and utterly tone deaf. But he's not heart deaf. He's not. He loves. It's no different. I'm thinking, okay, if I can understand this as an earthly father, I love it when without provoking, without conjuring, when Hannah or Aubrey say something along the lines of, Dad, you're just a good dad. Or Dad, I love it when you do these things. Or, Dad, I love you. Okay, I will walk through a wall right now. And that's me receiving, just to say praise, I don't like the way that that's worded, but you get what I'm saying. To receive that kind of affection from my own child, just think, if we can understand that here, just think about when we lift up his name. You think about, it's not because God needs the warm fuzzies. He doesn't need it. But man, I sure do want to be a blessing to him. And then I want, by the power of his Spirit, to be filled. I want his presence to fill my life so that the things that I face, the culture that I live in, I'm okay that the way I live life doesn't make sense to other people. He goes on to say this: shouting activates muscles in your backbone and your abdomen. If you want to get abs, start shouting. This is clinical research. Shouting activates muscles in your backbone and abdomen, which can increase overall strength. Your core is strengthened, and then you're set in your core, and you can move forward. There's none of this flimsiness, right? Your faith doesn't look like this. You're like, God, I praise your name. You are worthy. You are holy. Great is your name. Your name is above every name. Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that you are Lord. And when I shout like that, man, I straighten up. And then whatever it is that I'm facing, and the Bible's really clear that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities of darkness. When we get straightened up like that, and we got some warrior abs, we can face any kind of spiritual battle that we are facing when we shout praise and joy to him. You tired of getting kicked around? Start shouting. Good shouting, not angry shouting, joyful shouting. Look ridiculous about it. If you're facing something at work, go out of your office, shut your car door, and just shout God's name. Try it. I'd be really curious to hear what the implications of that or the aftermath of that is. Finally, this is the last little section. He actually specifies this type of yelling as yelling with spirit. Non-Christian doctor here, clinical study, saying those who yell with spirit are more focused, they concentrate better, they release tension. It's also good for the lungs, it stimulates the brain, and it builds confidence. Well, I'm just going to get out of my bed every morning and be like, yes! Sorry if I messed up anybody's ears. I wonder if Summer will be upset if I do that in the mornings. It's like, wake up, roll out of my bed, and just scream. I'm not going to do it again. I surprised myself on that one. Funny story, this has a little bit to do with this. Last year, there's the Vermilion and Amherst alumni game that was played at Vermilion. And Ryan, who's sitting here in the front row, he was the quarterback for Amherst. And obviously, I didn't grow up here, and so I'm just a spectator, even though I was asking if there was any way that I could play. And so Ryan is in the middle of the field, and there's a guy on the team named Josh who wasn't on the field, and he was supposed to be. And so the game's going on, there's noise, people are talking and celebrating and all this kind of stuff, and Ryan from the middle of the field just goes, Josh! And I was like, oh my, it like shook me, and I was like, am I supposed to be on the field right now? I mean, I felt compelled to go play because he just yelled, and it was so authoritative, and I was like, dang, I will follow that man's charge anywhere. That's the kind of result of just the shouting. Y'all, I know this may sound silly, but there's a lot of us who are given too much ground to the spiritual stuff going on around us. We need to put on our war cry. Honestly, if we keep diving into this word shout and joy, shout for joy is that exactly. It's a shout of victory. It is a war cry. And so and I'm not saying that you can't go through life and live somberly and quietly and you're not going to lack in life, but man, I want to be so intentional. And I don't want to give up any ground. I don't want to face anything with any kind of feebleness. And if part of what is required is me lifting up my voice to the one who created me, then so be it. I don't mind losing my voice for the one who gave it to me. I don't mind lifting up my voice if it means that my backbone and my abs are going to be tightened so that I can face whatever I'm facing. Because y'all, I don't know everybody's stories. I know mine better than anybody else, and I know that the things that I faced, I've been victorious because of God. Period. I have no room to brag about anything other than the fact that I depend on God. That is my claim to fame. I depend on God. Let's stop giving room and start lifting up his name. Now, this is important because it goes on to say this. Say to God. The word say is important. Well, before that, there's in verse 2 it says, sing the glory of his name, make his praise glorious. I don't have time to go into the word glory there, but glory is a really broad conversation. I wish I had time to spell it out, but the word glory is so good. Verse 3, say to God, how awesome are your deeds, again, pointing out the exclamation mark. So great, God, is your power that your enemies cringe before you. You know, that's what my desire is when I walk the streets of wherever I'm going. I want, in the spiritual realm, I want the spiritual opposition to cringe. Not because of me, but because of the one who's in me. Think about that. I want my spiritual opposition to cringe. Now, the first thought that came to my mind was, and just reveals the fact that I have children in my house, Lion King. You know, when the hyenas say Mufasa, and they're like, oh, say it again, Mufasa, oh. And they cringe. That's what I think of when I read this text. So powerful are you, God, that your enemies cringe. Listen to this definition of cringe. It means to fail. To grow lean. God's power causes things to grow lean. It means to be disappointing. Not disappointed, but his enemies are disappointing in his presence. Like, that's all you got? Kind of thought there'd be more of a fight, but that's literally all you are? So all of that was just a facade, just a loud bark. There's nothing else behind that. That's so disappointing. To be untrue, to be insufficient. Cringe is also fake obedience. I really stopped on that one. I was like, what does that mean? What to cringe is fake obedience. What does that mean? It means to give the impression that you're doing something that you're really not doing. To be obedient, you also have to be humble. And so at the power of God, that which is not godly, you know, when you're humble, you bow and you give respect. It's a fake humility. I don't want that to ever be said about me. In the presence and in the power of the living God, that I faked obedience. I don't want that. I'm not interested in that. The enemies cringe. All the earth bows to you. And then David says, come and see what he's done. Come and see what he's done. And there's a quick history recap on the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. And then we fast forward. I want to look at verses 17 through 20. It says, I cried out. Let me share with you what he's done for me personally. Not only just in a general sense, but then we fast forward down the way. I want to share with you what he's done for me. I cried out. His praise was on my tongue. And then he says, if I had cherished sin in my heart, he wouldn't have listened. He's not acknowledging sin. He's not ignoring sin in his life. He's saying, I chose not to cherish sin in my life. That's really an important distinction. To cherish something means to give regard, to look after it intently, or to give attention to it. So when you don't give attention to sin, it means that you want to expose it. You want to willingly expose sin because you have no regard for it. Does that explain our life? Or do we have a regard for sin? Do we want to protect it? In a sense, what we're doing is we're cherishing the very sin in our own life. And we may wonder why we don't hear God. It's because we're cherishing our defects more than we're cherishing Him. And God can't be fooled. He's not fooled by any of it. Don't cherish the things that don't honor Him. Don't cherish the things that don't give Him glory. I was thinking about the things that I cherish. I also, not only do I protect those things, but if it's something that's of absolute high regard, I also go to great lengths to hide it, to make sure nothing happens to it. So then I went down this thought path of, God, show me if I do that with sin. Show me if I go to great lengths to protect and hide so that it can't be discovered, so that I can keep on with it. You know, that right there is a vacuum of joy. That will suck joy out of your life because why? Because you know that that's in there, but you want to give the impression to others that you're a joy-filled person, but really it's just a performance of joy. It's not the reality of joy. My mind was just as quiet as it is right here, right now. When I was thinking about this, I was like, Lord, I want you to show me sin that I've cherished. He said, if I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. In other words, he wouldn't have any interest to listen. But God has listened. Praise be to God who did not reject my prayer or withhold His love from me. When you live a life where sin is not cherished, when you shout His name, you're going to have joy to your world. That's the premise, in my opinion, of Psalm 66. Shout joy to His name. Then the whole glorious thing, it would bring it together real nicely, but shout joy to His name. Don't cherish sin. And you will be a person who walks in the reality of joy. This week, it's not a question so much as it is finishing a statement. I will be filled with joy this week because, and then you finish the statement. Declare on a sheet of paper why you are going to be filled with joy. Mostly, I would anticipate the reason why you're going to live a joy-filled life is not because of anything you've done or anything about who you are. What I anticipate being written on these connection cards this week is all rooted in the reality of who He is. I will live a joy-filled life this week because, and then fill in the blank. And I know many of y'all in the moment, you're like, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to say. It's cool. You can go to our Family Fellowship website. You can go to our website and respond there as well. And stew on it a little bit. Reflect on it. As you're writing that out, though, I would also encourage you. This is such a bizarre charge. Shout sometime this week. Not out of anger. Not out of because you're frustrated about being confused about something or because somebody did something to you. Shout because of the reality of who God is. Shout because of His name. That's my charge to you. And if you you need to find a place, use your car. Use your basement. If you're around people, if you're at home, forewarn them so that they don't just hear loud shouting spontaneously. But shout out his name.